I first read through the Hunger Games trilogy when I was 17 years old, about a year after my mom forced me to go see the first film in theaters. I resisted because I kind of thought it was just going to be no different than the Twilight Saga, you know, some teenage love story with no real depth. Sorry, Twilight fans, just not my thing. But I could not have been more wrong. In fact, I was so intrigued that I wanted more lore and had so many questions, things that I could only receive and questions that could only be answered by reading the books, something I used to hate. While it did take me a good year to finally pick up the book and the whole trilogy for that matter and read them for myself, that would become a pivotal moment in my life for several reasons. The ironic thing is that the moments I enjoyed the most in the books were the sappy, cutesy moments. Not just the romantic moments though, but the sweet moments like between Katniss and Prim, Katniss and Cinna, and sometimes even Katniss and her prep crew. Obviously, I enjoyed many things about the trilogy. However, I did have a sense that there were deeper meanings and messages I didn't quite grasp yet. Remember, I was only 17. While typically teenagers think they know everything, or at least more than they actually do, I still couldn't help but have this nagging feeling that there was more to the story, and that something more was something I just didn't fully understand because of my age and lack of experience in the world. Now, I read the trilogy twice that year. The first was because I wanted to get more lore, I wanted questions answers, things that the movie just couldn't provide. The second was just before the second book, Catching Fire's movie adaptation would release late that November. From that point forward, I reread the trilogy every November, making this my 8th time reading through the story. November ended up being the specific time in which I would reread the trilogy because Catching Fire, Mockingjay Part 1, and the movie Mockingjay Part 2 all released in late November back-to-back years. Upon my 6th read-through when I was 22, I suddenly was a little put off by Katniss for whatever reason. Actually, I was really put off. It didn't last long though, because after some analysis and critical thinking, I was able to realize and understand what it was that bothered me and realize that it actually wasn't a bad thing, and in fact, built up the strength of the writing of her character. However, after this discovery, it would seem that rereading the trilogy, rewatching the movies, encountering the story in either form just became a lot more difficult to digest. It seemed that the more I grew as an adult, the more I understood about life and the world around me, the more arduous it became to reread the trilogy. It truly is a terrifying story, far more than my 17-year-old self realized. Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice and happy Hunger Games month. If you want, feel free to click the card to be taken to a video where I explain all the reasons why I got into the Hunger Games, why I love it, and why I reread it and rewatch the films every single year. However, be warned, this video is a year old and is not as good of quality as my stuff is now, so just give me some grace, okay? Alright, so one would think since this trilogy was aimed towards young adults, specifically kind of late teenagers, that the older I got, the less interested I would be, or at the very least, only be interested in as much as nostalgia would allow. That said, my mom loves this series, and knowing her, that should have been my first clue that there was more to the story. Needless to say, didn't pick up on that till later. Once I did pick up on it though, boy did it give us stuff to talk about, because as I started to pick up on the hidden messages and nuances, my mom realized that I had transitioned out of the phase of "oh yay, Peeta, Katniss, they're so strong, what a wonderful story" phase. So what's going on? What about this story is suddenly so unsettling for me? Obviously, I was perplexed from the get-go from the violence and gore. Suzanne Collins, in my opinion, did an excellent job giving all of the necessary details to allow us, the reader, to really feel what Katniss is feeling, mostly physically speaking. Though I wasn't an avid reader yet, I picked up on what she was writing and what she was telling us, and it was definitely disturbing. While I tend to write off blood and gore as lazy writing, this was one of those times where it was necessary to the story's progression in more ways than one, and I felt it was done correctly, if you will. You know, not just for shock value. However, most of that extreme bloodiness and gruesome nature was in the first book. There is a clear transition in Catching Fire where, yes, there is still physical violence and it's pretty disturbing, but there is more behind the scenes terror happening that we're aware of. Because before, since we only get Katniss's point of view for everything, we only saw the violence and gore. However, as she begins to see more behind the scenes stuff, we begin to see that terror too. More of a focus on the existential, mental, and emotional turmoil. This shift might be why Catching Fire, both the book and the movie adaptation, are my personal favorites of the series. There's an enormous amount of growth in so many areas. Story progression, character development, relational growth, romantic or not, world building, and added lore. My mind was already captivated by the base story from the first book, but this just delved even deeper and I loved it. By the time we get to Mockingjay, there's little physical violence, comparatively speaking. Yes, it's there, but it's the reverse of the first book. The introduction to the series is violence, death, blood, starvation, injuries, gore, etc., with us being slightly aware of nefarious things going on behind the scenes. Again, we are only aware in as much as Katniss is aware. Now, Mockingjay opens the floodgates of those heinous crimes done by the authorities of Panem and District 13. It's all about rebelling, fighting back, questions of morality concerning a just war, taking the excess power away from the government so it can be put back into the hands of the country's people, allowing them to rely on themselves and not the government, because it's never a good idea to rely on just the hands of the government. There goes that. Sadly, I do think this is why so many hated the last book. There's no games, they say. However, if you are truly paying attention, then you will realize that Finnick's words in the third book are true. This truly is the 76th Hunger Games. I loved it, although I wouldn't truly begin to appreciate its complexities until later on. Dang, it must really be about to rain because there is no light in here at all, and it's 1:30. Now, everything I've just stated, these are intricacies I didn't begin to grasp until after that moment when I was 22, after grappling with the character of Katniss. But before we get into that just yet, I do believe it's beneficial to review a different transition of mine, and that is how I view the romance and the relationship between Katniss and Peeta. As I hinted to earlier, in the beginning, I was mostly just enamored with the relationship of Katniss and Peeta. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. I've grown up since then. Yes, I knew even back then that there was more to the story, but again, I was 17. I didn't quite understand it all just yet. And for sure, more than just the romance piqued my interest, I just couldn't quite pinpoint what at the time. And to be clear, it's not just their romance, but their relation to one another and individual character development, also with each other, their character development, was what caught my attention as well. For years, it was completely obvious to me that Peeta is just a genuinely nice guy. Smart, clever, good at speaking? Absolutely. But nothing suggested that he was to be distrusted like Katniss thought. This could possibly be because I'm just naturally more like him than her, or at least I was. My college years would definitely start to turn me into more of a cynic. Thus, around the age of 21, I began empathizing more with Katniss's concerns in the beginning. At first, I merely sympathized. Yeah, I kinda got why she felt this way given her circumstances, but I didn't truly understand. And now it's raining. Oh well, gotta keep recording. Now, my similarities to Peeta, his positive thinking and moral philosophies, are for the most part still pretty dang similar. My opinion of him didn't change, but my understanding of Katniss did. Moving on to just the character of Katniss, I can begin to peel back the layers of why I began to grow a distaste for her, how it was resolved, and how this resolution would begin to shift my mindset when reading the series, making it much more difficult to read for me now. I like to think I wasn't your typical teen. I mean, I didn't rebel. I trusted my mother's decisions. I hated confrontation and was also taught to respect authority, so if I had an issue with said authority, I found someone in a more capable position to deal with it. I also did 100% of my middle and high school learning online because I did not want to deal with the social drama. I pretty much just went to dance, church, family, home, and errands. It was nice. However, underneath all this, I definitely did experience some of the symptoms of being a teenager. The waves that come and go from the hormones and transitioning into adulthood and thus wanting more independence. No, I didn't rebel, as I said, but I did grumble to myself when I was alone because I didn't wholly agree with all of my mother's decisions, though I did trust them. And that is just one example of me feeling like a normal teen would. So naturally, I wasn't initially put off by anything Katniss thought, said, or did. We were the same age, going through the same teenage hormones. Even if her thought processes were not the same as mine all the time, because I've already pointed out I was more like PETA, it still didn't register as annoying. Once I was 22 though, that would change. This would be my first time rereading the trilogy without the hype of another movie coming out. So that was one thing to think about. It was also the beginning of a long period in my life of growth and trials and such and change, so that was another part. All throughout rereading the trilogy, especially the first book, I couldn't help but look at some of the things she was thinking and doing and saying and be like, wow, you are so dumb. She had knee-jerk reactions, outbursts, was rebellious for all the wrong reasons, most of the time and mostly in the beginning, and then she all of a sudden seems like a wimp when she becomes the Mockingjay. After some deep thinking though, it hit me. She's 16, 17 years old. She's the outspoken version of me as a teen, more like most teens. It didn't bother me before because my brain ran the same way, even if I didn't react the same way. It's just that now that I'm older, not even my brain has these knee-jerk reactions like it used to. You know, like hers does, like any teen's does. On top of this, it can feel even worse to read her because of all of the horrible situations that have been thrust upon her, making her reactions even stronger. She's provided for her family since she was 11. She's been in the Hunger Games, leading to some serious PTSD, and then goes back into the games, and then is thrust into this world she's never been aware of that makes her realize there is so much more going on than she initially realized, making her want to shrink back from being the Mockingjay. It totally makes sense in this light now. And while my wording honestly I don't think does full justice to what the analysis was that I went through, I hope you can kind of understand how I could go through not annoyed to annoyed to understanding and having more admiration for her than ever. And the same kind of goes for other teen characters such as PETA and Gale. They all did stuff at some point that bothered me, and that makes sense because no one's perfect and they have to be written as flawed characters. Except Cinna. Cinna is perfect. I love Cinna. So what does my newfound understanding of Katniss have anything to do with the premise of this video? Once I began seeing our protagonist in a new light, naturally I began seeing the story in a new light. A scary light. I pointed out that Katniss begins to shrink away from being the symbol of the rebellion as the Mockingjay, and there are several reasons for this, but one of those is the fact that, frankly, it scares her. She does not want to play this big of a part in the rebellion, especially now that she kind of understands what's truly at stake. Help? Yes, absolutely, but under the radar. She also doesn't quite think being the face of the rebellion is actually helping because she wants to be out there on the front lines, so there's a little bit of pride in that too, but I understand it. The weight of the state of her country and the gravity of the importance of the rebellion takes a big toll on her. She realizes how vulnerable she is, how small she is, and yet how much weight rests on her. As stated before, we only understand as much as Katniss understands, to a point, because we get the entirety of the series from her perspective. This was my turning point. Katniss's fear runs far deeper than just not wanting to be the face of the rebellion. I began to see, like her, the seriousness of the terror going on around her on a whole new level far bigger than that which she just experienced in District 12. The atrocity of the Capitol, the state of the districts, the true terror in the tactic and mindset behind the games, and the horror of the government having way too much power. These were things I was finally able to understand and comprehend now, far more than the old 17-year-old who didn't even really pay attention to the history classes fed to her through her online public school system. History lessons which have been slightly modified in some areas throughout the last 10 years, not too dissimilar to the lack of history for the people of Panem. Now hold on, I am in no way saying we live in this kind of world now exactly, though I have seen tiny traits of this in other countries, unfortunately. I'm proud to be a citizen of the USA, and the more I learn about our history, the true history, the more appreciative I am of how much we've grown. Because my country, like any country, is not perfect, but we're constantly working to improve and get better as we always have done, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. What I am saying is that I can now see how the events of the Hunger Games trilogy, the idea of them anyway, could come to be under certain circumstances. Do I think they will? No, not at all, especially if we continue to educate ourselves and continue learning from our past, but not dwelling in it. In the words of Walt Disney, keep moving forward. But I don't want to get more political than that. I could, but that's not what my channel is about, so moving on. In conclusion, these books are phenomenally written, more than I ever realized. Because the more you learn about the world, the more disturbing they are to read. This is because they are not fantasy novels. These ideas, these horrors are things that have happened to some degree and could happen again if we're not careful. In the beginning, I was just a teen and I related to some of the characters on a certain level, and I did think the story was powerful, but that was kind of it. Strong enough to stick with me and keep me going back and rereading it even if I didn't quite fully grasp all the ideas just yet. As I've gotten older, each reread brings something new. It does so because I continue to grow in my awareness of the world just a little bit more. And because the books are so rich in its messages that as I grow, my experience of the books renew. Messages that are so well portrayed, not by telling us, but by showing us. Suzanne Collins has definitely mastered the show don't tell concept, in my opinion. I really hope this long-winded explanation does a somewhat decent job of revealing to you why this series continually gets tougher and tougher to read and digest. I have mad respect for Suzanne Collins, seriously. Naturally, I'm super excited to read the prequel she's writing, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, coming May 2020. Taking place during the 10th Hunger Games, just 10 years after the Dark Days, the war that ended in the destruction of District 13, means we will get a whole new setting, pretty much, and a whole slew of new characters. I want to see what Collins is going to be showing us, what subtle messages she's going to be slipping in for us. I'm pretty anxious, in more ways than one, to get a hold of this book, especially after years of experience with its original trilogy. Y'all, thank you so much for watching. I know that the number of fans on my channel that are Hunger Games fans are slim pickings, but I do hope even if you're not the biggest Hunger Games fan, you do still enjoy the Hunger Games month videos to some degree. And if you did enjoy it, maybe consider subscribing if you haven't already. I talk about a slew of topics other than the Hunger Games, obviously. So yeah, be sure to check out some other geeky videos of mine like these right here. But anyway, that is all for today. Thank you for watching.